taking over as a color commentator back in 2001, Joe Rogan has essentially become the voice of the UFC. The popular podcast host is a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt who, over the years, has shown he definitely knows his stuff when it comes to the sport of mixed martial arts. That being said, Rogan is also known to be a very opinionated person. While the previously mentioned trait has helped him become very successful in a variety of different fields, it has also been known to rub more than a few people up the wrong way. As the company's longest tenured commentator, the former Fear Factor host has gotten on several UFC fighters' bad sides with some of his critiques. From former champs to preliminary fighters, the world-famous comedian doesn't discriminate when it comes to upsetting well-known mixed martial artists. With all that being said, I'm Gareth from WhatCulture Combat, and here are 10 UFC stars Joe Rogan pissed off. Number 10. QUINTON "Rampage" Jackson. Like Rogan, former UFC light heavyweight champion QUINTON "Rampage" Jackson is a man who isn't shy about sharing his opinion. In 2012, Jackson voiced his displeasure with Rogan's commentary following his loss to Ryan Bader at UFC 144. During the post-fight interview, he said sometimes, when alluding to hearing him, because Joe Rogan has one of those girly high-ass voices that you can hear. I just want to tell him to shut the F up, let's see you do it. Moreover, when asked how a potential fight between Rogan and Jackson would turn out, the A-Team star did not mince his words. He said, "I would beat the S out of Joe Rogan as long as he doesn't get me to the ground because his jiu-jitsu is really good." But he's not wrong. While the former champ's words were rather harsh, the two men eventually made peace with each other later down the road. Number 9. CRIS CYBORG. As a commentator, discussing a fighter's performance in the cage is part of the job. However, making disparaging remarks about an athlete's physical appearance on any platform isn't exactly going to earn you many friends. On an episode of the Joe Rogan Experience, the host implied that former UFC champ CRIS CYBORG had a manly appearance by joking that she had a penis. Nice. He would go on to apologise for the remark, but it was clear that the reigning Bellator queen was understandably a bit upset. For her part, CYBORG sent out a tweet directed at both Rogan and UFC president Dana White. The post read, "Every woman deserves the right to go to work in an environment free of sexual harassment, online bullying, and workplace intimidation." The incident was part of what led to the rift between CYBORG and the UFC in the first place, which eventually resulted in her release from the company. Number 8. Jacob VOLKMANN. Jacob VOLKMANN is a former UFC fighter who competed for the promotion from 2009 to 2013 in both the welterweight and lightweight divisions. At UFC 125, following a hard-fought split decision victory over Antonio McKee, as is customary, VOLKMANN was interviewed by Joe Rogan. During the awkward exchange, the lightweight contender made disparaging remarks about then US President Barack Obama. While his comments were intended to be humorous, I guess, the live audience wasn't really amused. Rogan also shot the fighter a strange, uncomfortable look during the failed promo. When asked about the post-fight interview by MMA reporter Ariel Helwani, VOLKMANN stated, "I thought Joe Rogan would laugh a little more. He kind of ruined it for me. He ruined it. I wanted to punch him in the nuts. I think he's a Democrat even though I know he's not." Fortunately, the whole bizarre exchange has been mostly forgotten until now, and, well, it's just sad, isn't it? Number 7. Chael Sonnen. Chael Sonnen is a man who knows a thing or two about pissing people off. Over the course of his UFC career, the American gangster was known as one of the sport's premier trash talkers. However, back in June of 2018, it was Sonnen who took exception to a remark made by Joe Rogan. The former middleweight title challenger didn't like how Rogan implied that controversial UFC star Colby Covington's polarizing persona was simply an act to garner attention, even though it was. While Sonnen claimed he wasn't mad at Rogan, his tone and the remarks he made on the subject indicated otherwise. On his podcast, You're Welcome, the retired fighter stated, "I was so upset with him. Joe has a history of doing this and I do not know why he does it. It is inappropriate and it is infuriating, but he has no ill intent." He would then go on to say, "To explain to you how wrong that was of Joe to do, I would need this entire show. You don't ever turn on the business when you're in it." Number 6. Leonard Garcia. Leonard Garcia is a former UFC featherweight who is perhaps best known for his Fight of the Year WEC bout with the Korean zombie himself, Chang Sung Jung, back in 2010. Later that year, Garcia faced Nam Phan and was awarded a split decision victory. However, there was one man who clearly didn't agree with the judge's verdict, and that man was, of course, Joe Rogan. In fact, Rogan went so far as to refer to the decision as gross. When asked about Rogan's criticism, Garcia stated, "It does piss me off because I have nothing to do with the decision. It bothers me to hear him say some of that stuff he said. It's kind of a bad deal, but all it's going to do is fire me up for the next one." Well said. Unfortunately for Garcia, Rogan's comments appeared to have the opposite effect. He would go on to lose his next 5 bouts before ultimately being released from his UFC contract in 2013. Number 5, Tyron Woodley. Though he has appeared on the Joe Rogan Experience, former welterweight champ Tyron Woodley has also had his fair share of issues with the longtime UFC commentator. One of the major issues between the two centered around Woodley's former training partner, CM Punk. While discussing Punk on his show, Rogan said the former WWE superstar was a real good guy, but he doesn't have talent. Woodley fired back on behalf of his colleague, stating, "First thing, I have to stand on Joe Rogan's stones. Come up off my homie CM Punk. You got smoke with him, you got smoke with me, so watch your mouth." More recently, this past March, Woodley was critical of Rogan's commentary at UFC 248. The former welterweight king felt Rogan went too easy on Israel Adesanya following one of the most boring pay-per-view main events in recent memory. Woodley stated that it's funny how no one got into Rogan's earpiece and let him know he, alluding to Adesanya, broke the record for the least amount of strikes thrown in a title fight. No essing on their prima donna, just excuses and exceptions. How convenient. One gets the feeling Woodley won't be making another podcast appearance anytime soon. Which is a bit of a shame because it'd be bloody brilliant after those comments. Number 4, CATHAL PENDRED. With a record of 17 wins, 4 losses and 1 draw, retired UFC fighter CATHAL PENDRED had a very solid career. However, he is arguably better known as the man who saved a beached baby dolphin in a 2014 video that went viral. And you can see why. The Irish animal lover is also one of several UFC standouts who has had issues with Joe Rogan's commentary. During Pendred's 2015 bout with Sean Spencer, Rogan was critical of the fighter's cardio and disagreed with the decision after Pendred was awarded the victory. Pendred, who wasn't exactly pleased with the commentator's remarks, told MMA Junkie, "The thing that was most insulting was by the last minute of the last round, Joe Rogan was talking about how bad my cardio was and how exhausted I was. I was taking down my opponent who was doing nothing, and Rogan was talking about how tired I was." Now a health food store franchisee, Pendred no longer has to worry about Rogan's critiques. Number 3, Mark Coleman. UFC Hall of Famer and MMA pioneer Mark Coleman is credited as being the godfather of ground and pound. Back in 2016, the UFC legend got into a minor scuffle with Joe Rogan. The two men appeared to be sharing a laugh following a comedy show when an impromptu wrestling match broke out. Rogan caught his opponent off guard and took Coleman's back, but the retired fighter managed to escape. Coleman, who clearly did not want to wrestle, proceeded to grab the comedian by the throat and forcibly shoved him. It was a relatively minor incident and the two men remain friends. That being said, the Coleman encounter is noteworthy as it's the only time things have ever got physical between Rogan and a UFC fighter, in a public setting at least. Perhaps he had a grappling match with Kamaru Usman after his last appearance on the Joe Rogan Experience. I'd like to see that. Number 2, Colby Covington. Outspoken UFC welterweight contender Colby Covington has verbally jousted with pretty much every fighter on the planet. One man who he's had particularly harsh words for is reigning light heavyweight champion John Jones, who Covington referred to as a cokehead. On his podcast, Rogan chimed in on the verbal feud and suggested the welterweight standout should refrain from making such remarks. The UFC commentator would go on to say, "John Jones is going to be in front of you one day. You've got to be careful. Watch your effing words. You're going to get slapped in the face by a guy who can kill you with his hands. That's a bad move." Of course, Covington took exception to Rogan's remarks. The former interim title holder fired back, proclaiming, "You've never been in an octagon. You don't have any experience fighting." He thinks he has a say in everything, and he's a biased announcer as it is. He also implied that he would confront Rogan at UFC 225, but nothing ever really came of it. Because of course it didn't. Number 1. Ronda Rousey. At the height of her UFC run, there was plenty of hype surrounding former UFC Women's Bantamweight champion Ronda Rousey. Joe Rogan often sung her praises and even claimed she could beat some of the male bantamweights in the UFC. However, following Rousey's 2-fight skid, Rogan admitted he was mistaken about her ability to defeat male members of the roster, and was also critical of her performance against Nunes. To be fair, the UFC commentator wasn't alone. In the course of just 2 fights, almost everyone in the MMA world had jumped off the Ronda Rousey bandwagon. The former Olympic medalist didn't take too kindly to what she apparently perceived as the fickle nature of both Rogan and those in the MMA community. As Rogan's friend Joey Diaz explained, "I went to this place and bumped into this guy. I've met this guy a few times, he's a big MMA guy. And he pulled me over to say how mad Ronda Rousey was at Joe Rogan." Not only Joe Rogan, but anybody in that time period that she got knocked out. Anybody who said anything of a negative air, she's just furious and she has a long list and she's very angry. There's still no word as to who else was scribbled onto that aforementioned list, but it seems clear that Rogan and Rousey won't be enjoying an amicable conversation on the Joe Rogan Experience for quite some time yet. And that's our list. Know of any other MMA stars that Joe Rogan has pissed off over the years? Let us know all about them in the comment section below, and do not forget to like, share, click on that subscribe button and ring the bell for all things WhatCulture Combat. Also be sure to head on over to WhatCulture.com and click on some more brilliant articles just like the one this video is based on. I have been Gareth from WhatCulture Combat. Thank you very much for watching today, and I hope you're having the best of days and that I see you very soon.